Morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Performance Analytics and Reporting Office Hours. Welcome to everybody. I see lots of returning names and a few new ones. Let's get started. So first of all, this session is for you. The idea here is that we're able to share some new ideas, give you a better understanding, especially today, kind of how PA works and how you can get the most out of it. Today, and all our sessions are recorded. If you have an issue with that, please disconnect now, but we're recording all these and they are posted to the community and they'll be posted to YouTube as well for your reference and to share with all your friends. And Q&A. As we're going through this and we're talking about some things, please use the Q&A window in Zoom to ask us questions. If you put it in chat, we may not see it. It may get missed as it strolls by. The Q&A allows us to make sure that we answer everybody's question that comes in. It also allows us to record those questions so we can post those answers later on. So please, if you have any questions as we're going, and in this session, I expect we'll have some questions, please put them in Q&A so we can address them as we're going. So today I want to introduce myself. I'm Adam Stout. I'm your host for today, an outbound product manager for Now Platform and Now Intelligence. And our speaker today is Thomas Davis, who we've heard from in the past. Also an outbound product manager for Now Platform and Now Intelligence. And Thomas has done a lot of work to prepare the best practices for data collection. Before we get into that, as a reminder, we record these, we post these. The deck that Thomas presents is going to be posted into the community. All the past ones are posted in there, as well as the recording and a shortcut to the links that we talk about in the references. And there are a lot of references in this presentation. So if you hit that community article, you can view all the past ones. And when this one comes up, you'll get quick access to all the links that we're sending out. And as we go, as we talk about every session, there is lots of training available. A lot of what we're talking about in these best practices are covered in the training, whether it's K20 labs and we go through them, or in the performance analytics training that's available. Lots and lots and lots of training for you. The K20 labs, I've heard, are going to be retired at the end of the year. So if you have not taken advantage of the performance analytics and reporting labs from Knowledge 20, I'd recommend doing that in the next couple months. I believe we have 10 labs out there, 10 or 11 labs just in this area. So if you haven't taken them, I'd recommend to take them, send them to your colleagues. They're free. It's self-paced. You get some more hands-on experience. That's there a lot, as well as a lot of other content out there. Out of the community, I think most of us found this from looking in the community and seeing the posting in there. We're going to do our best to answer the questions that you have today, but if you have more, please post a question in the community. And if you haven't read this guide, there's just some great tips about how to get an answer that you're looking for in the fastest amount of time. When you just go, I need help, it's hard for us to help you. But if you follow some of these some of these recommendations, you're going to be able to get an answer much more quickly. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thomas, who's going to talk us through some data collection best practices.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Let me share my screen here. Make sure I share the right one. Okay. All right, you can see my screen, right?
Looks great.
Okay, good. Thanks, Adam. So thank you for everyone that has come today. Today we're going to talk about data collection best practices. Again, my name is Thomas Davis, and although this may not be all of the best practices that are out there, these are the ones that we felt we could share with you all to give the best impact on your data collection process and its performance to hopefully help it run more efficiently. That's what we hope for today. So our agenda, so what we're going to try to talk about today, we'll first discuss what data collection is. Although I'm pretty sure everyone here is aware of what data collections are, we think it would be a good idea to just talk through the process and explain how things work. Then we'll talk through some of the do's and don'ts of data collection, talk through some solutions to make data collection jobs run more efficiently. Then we'll finish up with some great sources and, of course, open up the call to some questions about data collections. Hopefully we'll have some of those. So what is a data collection? When using performance analytics, you have to gather data together to then display in the Analytics Hub or dashboards, whichever you choose to. Performance analytics uses scheduled jobs to collect and clean scores and snapshots of data, and also enable you to manually set or import scores as well. If you need to collect data immediately for existing records, you would run a historical data collection job. For ongoing data collections, there's a couple different methods that we can choose from. If you need to measure an indicator once a month, a quarter, or a year, enter scores manually or import scores. If you need to measure indicators more often or frequently, or if you just want to eliminate any human involvement, you'll want to use a scheduled data collection for that. So how does it work? So here we have all the different ways and some of the additional things that you can do inside of data collections that we have here with the link. So again, I'm sure that most of you know, but if you don't know, this whole slide deck will be made available to you after the call is over and we get it pushed out into a blog in the community. So you'll actually be able to have access to these links where you can get more in-depth information about every one of these. But we just wanted to hit all of these at a very high level, so you would understand exactly what you can do and exactly how it works. So again, talking about collect historical data. This is to collect scores and snapshots of existing records. Remember, when collecting data for the first time, such as a new indicator, run a historical data collection once to generate scores and snapshots for existing records. So the big thing to remember about this is an historical collection is not something that you would run every day for data that you have already collected. It's not necessary. And you don't want to potentially write over something that you're collecting in a different manner somewhere else. So just remember, the biggest thing for historical data collections is that first time for an indicator, or even breakdowns. If you add a breakdown or whatnot to an indicator that's already out there, that's when you'll use that. So you can create or schedule data collection jobs, obviously. So here we schedule a data collection job to run or to regularly collect scores. So this may be something that is a lot more, that happens a lot more than a historical job. Configure a job indicator. Here we can increase the efficiency of your data collection by configuring job indicators to collect only what is necessary and sensible. Gives you the ability to be a little bit more precise for exactly what you want. You obviously can cancel the data collection anytime. Hopefully, if you've had to use it, hopefully you've never had to use it, but if you did, you know exactly where that is. So you can cancel an active data collection job to stop the job from finishing the collection job in its current state. Add or edit indicator scores manually. You can always manually enter scores, score data for indicators if you need to, including automated indicators as well. So view data collection job events. So when you look at a job event, you can see which jobs have been executed for PA and which actions, if any, have been triggered in your instance, such as notifications or business rules. So the job collection or the data collection job event is a good source for you to actually go to see what has actually happened with that job, what is triggered, and so on and so forth. Data collection jobs. So job logs are our friend. They should be your friend. It's a great source for you to find things out, not necessarily all the time when a job fails, but also just see if there is some latency that's happening inside of a job or whatnot. You can really see some good things from there. So it will display information about data collection jobs that have run for PA. You have the ability to view the job logs, create events, and view and edit the event registry if you need to. All logs are displayed unless they're filtered. So next is the data collection process and logging. So this is the best place to debug a data collection. It's always helpful to understand the data collection process and how it's reflected in the jobs. So this gives you the ability to actually look in depth into the job logs and see, step by step, if you needed to, of what's actually happening in the job. And then, of course, if there were any warnings or errors or whatnot. And then last, you can view the data collection usage. So if you need or want to view statistics about job collection jobs, click the data collection overview. And that is a usage tile that's inside of the PA admin console itself. So here are some of the best practices that we have listed out. We will go into more detail for each one of these. But again, what can you do at the indicator source to make data collection jobs better? It can start right there, and it should start right there with some of the decisions that you make around your indicator source to make sure that as it goes forward, the data collection job will collect more efficiently. Are there things that you can do at the indicator level? Absolutely. At the data collection level itself, what practice should you always try and follow? We'll go over those. And then we'll look at some of the advanced practices that, again, if we can try and follow, it will make data collection more efficiently for you. So indicator sources. So the big thing that I'm sure that most of you have heard, if you have not heard this, this is huge. So dates, not states. I sometimes think that this could be a slogan for Adam. I've heard Adam say this more than anybody, but it's really something that's big that needs to happen at that indicator source level itself. So here you can see in the example that we're actually creating an indicator source. And when we zoom in there, you can actually see that we're going to create some different conditions, but we make sure that we're looking at specific days. So although an active filter in many cases is important, here it is not, as using it does not allow accurate historic collections. Although that you do want to see for anything that is actually active, and it's okay to put that into the conditions, but don't let that be the only thing that you put into the conditions. If you can put a date in there, make sure that you actually do that. It's going to make everything work better and more efficiently as you go down the line. So with a set of date conditions indicators based on this definition, retrieve the accurate set of records when running an historic scores collection because the dates do not change. Using today is simply today when you're collecting on that day. This lets us know what is currently open today. The today operand is placeholder for real dates and is replaced by real dates during data collection. So you'll see that when you're collecting, even though it says today, it's just basically, it knows the dates of today, and that's what it's actually going to capture inside of the data itself. So again, if you take anything away from indicator sources, dates, not states. So next, at the indicator level itself, the number of incidents that were open yesterday is not going to change. So it doesn't make sense to pull that data again. And if an indicator is in multiple daily jobs, collecting multiple times, you're causing unnecessary, unneeded work to be done. So in this example here, we can see that this particular indicator was actually a part of multiple daily jobs. There's no reason for the indicator to be in more than one daily job. So going through the process of actually looking at your indicators, obviously during creation, you want to make sure that you do not put them in multiple data collection jobs. However, as instances go on and things get added and other people have the ability to create indicators and add them into jobs, it's probably a good practice for you to every once in a while try to figure out a schedule where you actually go in and look at some of the indicators, if not all of them, especially the indicators that are used quite heavily, and make sure that they're not in multiple daily jobs. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no efficiency in that. So make sure that you're actually pulling them out of the multiple daily jobs themselves. They can stay in a historical job. It doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt for them to sit there because historical jobs should only be ran on demand. So it's not like they're actually part of a schedule. So it doesn't necessarily hurt them sitting there because they're probably not running in that historical job anyway. So data collection itself. So let's talk about exactly what we're trying to pull with a daily collection and when we should actually run that job. So here you can see that we have a relative start date of 1 and 1, which means that we're looking for anything that is yesterday, not today. And the reason for that is we cannot give an accurate measure for a day until the day is actually complete. So we'll capture the data for yesterday, 1 day ago, not today, which would be 0 days ago. We save processing time by not recalculating things that do not change. As we talked about earlier, it's important that the indicator sources themselves include a date filter. Every extra day's worth of data increases the processing time linearly. So the more that you're looking for, the longer the processing time is going to take. Historical jobs containing a wider time frame should not be run or on a scheduled basis. They should be only used when collecting data for the first time. We also want to make sure that we run this job between midnight and 6 a.m. Again, we cannot give an accurate measure for a day until that day is complete. The more quickly data changes, they should be run closer to midnight, but not before, to capture the accurate values for fast changing breakdowns like state. Time is displayed in your time zone, but should be run after midnight for the time zone the job is set to run for. So what does that mean? So that means that if I'm in the Eastern, which I am in the Eastern time zone, and I have that job set up to run, That's when it's actually going to kick off. But the time itself is going to be based off where you want it actually ran at. For an example, so if I tell it I need it to run at 1 o'clock in the morning, 01000, but I'm in Eastern, but I know the data is for the West Coast. Well, that the West Coast has not gotten to midnight yet. I actually want to make sure that I run that maybe 3 hours after midnight in my time zone to make sure that I capture everything that has been done for the day prior in the West Coast. So make sure that you pay attention to the data that you're collecting, where you're actually at yourself that has, the time zone that you have it set for, to make sure that you're still going to be able to capture anything for the day prior itself. So next we'll talk about the run as user. So the run as user must be an active account. Honestly, if you can dedicate a system account to it, that's the best option and really what is preferred. The data collector itself bypasses ACL, so there's nothing to worry about it being able to collect all the data based on table security. It will bypass that and it will pull all the data in. Whatever run as account you use, it generally doesn't need any roles. So again, if you were to create a dedicated system account, you don't have to worry, and it was for this specifically, you don't have to worry about any roles that are needed inside of that account itself in order to run the data collection. If you're using scripts, they execute as a run as user, and ACLs are honored in scripts. So if there's a table that you're accessing inside of the script, understand that whatever ACLs are on that particular table, since you're calling it in the script, that particular run as user would need that in order to pull any of the data based on what the script is. And then obviously remember that when displaying any of these records, ACLs are enforced. If and when you need to debug a data collection, it'd be simpler if you're using a dedicated user account. Because when you look through job logs, if you decide to look through job logs, if you need to look through job logs, then being able to find and search for that specific user account will make life a lot easier when you're looking for particular things at a particular time or whatnot. So again, the biggest thing to take away from this is if your run as user can be a system account, we would definitely recommend that you do that. And by all means, it definitely has to be an active user. So let's talk about time zones again a little bit here. There are two that are involved with the data collector. What time zone the jobs are run in. So remember that today will be defined with this time zone. This is important when you make sure that you are collecting all the relevant scores. Time zone is also used for the score start and score end. These are used in your scripts if you're writing a script, the variables. So you'll want to make sure that you're getting the exact timestamp that you need with that time zone to make sure that whatever you're using inside of the script itself is collecting the right information. If the time zone is not set, it'll just use the system time by default. Next, when the job runs, so this displays in your time zone. So this is what time the job itself will actually run. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just remember, make sure that if you're in a different time zone than the data that you're actually trying to gather, make sure that you schedule it in enough time where the day will be over for the day prior for you to make sure you get everything. So a couple of quick best practices here. So for daily jobs, this will normally be between midnight and 6, as we said, for the run as. Try not to have more than 2 jobs overlap and always stagger the start times. We'll talk about this actually a little bit more in this next slide here. Maybe if I can get my slides to advance. There we go. All right. So here, let's talk about scheduling jobs and if they're scheduled on top of each other. So this is very important. It is worth taking the time to manage this to make sure that, again, you have more efficient job collection. So what we want to talk about in this case is making sure that none of your data jobs are scheduled on top of one another. So actually, when you're doing this and when you're actually creating, it's worth it for you to look at the other jobs that are already there if you're creating a new job to make sure that you choose not to actually schedule it the same start time of an existing job. The other big thing to always look at is how long does a job take? And obviously that comes down to how much data that you're collecting, what type of data that you're collecting. But if you can look at how long on average a particular job takes to run, then that will help you from a scheduling perspective to decide when you want this particular job to start after another job that is maybe, let's say that there's a job that's starting at 4:30 in the morning and you want to schedule one to start around that same time. If the one at 4:30 on average ends in about 3 minutes, well, then it wouldn't hurt to go to 4:35 for yours, just to give it a little bit of buffer and to make sure that they're not starting and staggering and they're on top of each other. And we can kind of see that here a little bit inside of this here. So here we have some jobs, and this will be kind of fast, but you'll understand the premise. So here we have some jobs that are all starting at 4:30. Let's fix these. So the easiest way to do that, and I for time for this particular for office hours, I didn't go into all of them, but basically you'll just go into them and then you'll just change that start time. So basically what I did here when I fixed these is I went in there and I just changed these by 5 minutes. So now you can see it goes from 4:30 or from 4:30 to 4:35 to 4:40. Again, your start time after an existing job may not be the 5 minute window that I did in this. This is just an example. Again, what you need to look at is what's that average time that it takes the job that you're scheduling after to finish for you to decide what's the best start time for that. So again, these are small little practices that you can do that will help the efficiency and also how much is actually running at the same time. And again, these are one of those things that if you stay on top of it, it can be controlled quite easily. But if things get out of hand and there's multiple people that have the ability to create jobs or add jobs to indicators or anything of that sort, you know that it could get out of control. So it's probably, again, a best practice for something that maybe you want to go in and look at every so often to make sure that the times are offset and they're not and they're staggering and they're not on top of each other. So again, this is a good practice to try to follow for that. So next, we'll talk about historical collections and their limits. So these are only applied to historic scores, which are only performed once after a new indicator and or breakdown is created. So again, going back to what we talked about earlier, historical collections should really be used when something is new. For an example, a new indicator, or if you have an existing indicator and you've added a new breakdown to it, and you need to be able to show that historical information based on that breakdown. Historical jobs themselves are not something that should be ran every day. They honestly, I mean, it really should be set up where it's an on-demand type job. So don't schedule it. It doesn't need to be scheduled. It should be something that you do, again, whenever any of these particular things happen. And the other time that they should be ran is if there's something that's out of the box that has been installed, that's been turned on, if a plugin has been turned on or whatnot, that's out of the box, and you want to be able to collect the historical information for that. Those are the times that you want to run historical jobs. So there are some limits. So it is not possible to retrieve accurate historical scores on open records for indicators that are based on conditions or fields for which the values will change during the life cycle. For an example, if a state changes, the historical job is only going to collect whatever state it is in when it's ran. So if you have something that's looking at opened and then you decide to run historical, and that historical is looking for a state that's closed, and it happens to close, but it does that, you're not ready to actually show it like that, then it will change that data. So remember that when you do those things historically, data will obviously change for that. So last updated, the reassignment count breached for indicator breakdown combinations that have breakdowns on fields of which the values will change during the life cycle of the open record. So all of that information can change. So that's really a limit to what the historicals job do, because they're looking for very specific. So make sure that you know when you're running an historical job collection. Again, it's an on-demand thing. Don't make it a daily thing. So some of the more advanced things that we want to kind of talk to a little bit, so to make sure that you understand that these can and will affect job collections, their processing times, and things of that nature. So scripts. So like we hit on earlier, score start and score end variables are used in scripts when date processing is needed for indicators like age. And this is something that is very common. This is not something that's uncommon. Just understand that the time that the data is collected, going back to that indicator source where you have, where we say, dates not states, and the score start is the today, right? It's gonna capture that date. So you want to make sure that all of those things are set up correctly before you get to the point where now you're using a script to make sure that the score start and the score end variables are what you need them to be in order to make that script run and return whatever data that you're actually looking for. So the next thing is manual breakdown. So they're out there, but however, they should be replaced with database views for better performance. So whenever you have the ability to actually change the manual breakdowns to a database view, it's highly recommended you do that. And we have a link to a prior office hours that actually talks in great depth about solutions around database views that we'll show here in a second. So, and then the last thing is data transformation. So it should be handled with business rules and event-based transformation to support using the data in reporting filters, predictive intelligence, flow designer, et cetera. So where data transformation is needed and used, make sure that you're using, the data transformation, and business rules will really help you in that as well. So if you have the ability to do that, or if you have to get with your admin to talk around things like that, anytime that you can use things like that, it will make data collection better. And it's highly recommended that you do those things. So with that, so again, here are some great sources. So the first couple slides where I actually talk through every one of those particular things as it relates to data collection. Here are the links for all of those. They're in those slides, but they're also right here as well. There are some great community blogs or office hours, I'm sorry, that have already been done in the past that it would be a really good idea for you to reference back to those. And then obviously inside ServiceNow Learning itself, the fundamentals, advanced, and application specialists, those courses talk in depth about data collection as well. So if you've not done any of those and you want to get more comfortable and more information about those are highly recommended as well. And then there are some K20 courses as well that are still out there, like Adam said, that you can reference as well. So although, you may not need all of these now, I would definitely tell you to take the time to look through, or at least bookmark these links for future reference, because we believe that they'll most definitely help you out if and when you need more information about data collection in the future. So make sure that you look at these if you need it. I think they'll definitely help you out. And with that, hopefully we did not go through that too quick. Obviously, all of this information will be put into the blog. All of the videos will be out there that are part of this display. Of this office hours will be in the blog as well. But we're at the time probably that most want, which I'm actually seeing the questions come in. So what do we have for questions?
Okay, so we'll start from the ones that came in. For a global environment, for a global company, when is the best time to schedule a job?
So I think, and Adam, I don't know if you have a better answer for this, but I think that it really comes down to, the data itself when it's ending. So, where the person is at, or where the time zone is at that's actually running the job, will play a huge part in that, just like I was speaking to earlier. And Adam, I don't know if there is a best practice around that, because it really just talks about when the day is going to be over for a particular area, but this obviously is a moving target. So I don't know if there's a best practice or a time that you're thinking yourself.
So where I go for this one is, it depends, right? Generally speaking, if I'm looking at things like number of incidents in a day, it doesn't matter what the day is. It's 24 hours. It's 24 hours, and the numbers should average out. So part of it doesn't matter, but you do have to pick one. So the one I go with is wherever I close my books. If my indicator was something about like a MIA incidents, or if it had some area that it was focused in on, it was for my APJ execs, then maybe I'd pick a time zone relevant to them. But ostensibly, for ServiceNow, our company is based in Santa Clara in California, Pacific time zone. So I picked Pacific time zone. And my teammates in EMEA, their day is defined by California time. Same thing for the Australian team. A day has to do with when that day is in Pacific time. And the logic is, it's the same as closing your books. Financially speaking, you got to pick a time. So we pick one where most of the people are, and then we go with it. And again, because 24 hours is 24 hours regardless, it doesn't really matter. Generally speaking, people can get hung up on that. but it normally doesn't matter. We have to pick a date. I pick where the company is based, or where if I had a support center in Amsterdam, then I'm going to probably pick the Amsterdam date, but or time zone. But it's going to be subjective. You just generally wanted to link up and communicate that. Just like our financial books are based on one time zone. I put all of my indicators based in in that same time zone. It answers all those. And as we go through, the challenge goes through it is reporting won't match. But when we get into indicators and we're looking at monthly levels, again, we just say it's going to be Pacific time. Everybody understands Pacific time, and we go from there.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's why I definitely gave it to you.
Yeah.
So I think the next one is, when should manual breakdowns be used? So whenever you have a breakdown that you can't find a reference for in a particular table, i.e. the sys choice or something like that, if you can't find, or if there's not a reference to the particular breakdown that your need inside the data, then or not necessarily inside the data, but there's just not a reference that you can actually use. You can't get to the table, or it could be quite a few results inside of that table. So, you would create a manual breakdown. And I think the one that probably is used most often, and Adam, you can definitely elaborate on this as well. I see a lot of people use a manual breakdown for like hours, for, buckets and things like that. So that's generally when manual breakdowns are there to be used. But I think that most of the times everybody can get whatever they need based out of what is there. But Adam, again, you may have a better example that you could answer with this as well.
And those are good. The hours one is certainly one that comes up. My general answer, my preference, I'll go with my preference, is manual breakdowns would be used with manual indicators. That's fine, right? Because manual's manual and you can't do it. I have heartburn if I see a manual breakdown on an automated indicator, because when you use manual breakdowns, you need a script. That script requires a query to the database. Your job time is going to take a hit. If it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But I run into very few instances where performance does not matter. So I generally don't want to use them. And we talk about this in the descripting PA. We talked about in the descripting PA office hours a while ago about alternatives to manual breakdowns. That they are there if you need them for the use cases Thomas talked about. If we can't get rid of them, but if I need something really quick, I'll do it and not feel good about myself, but I'll do it. But the real use case for manual breakdown is a manual indicator, where it is something that does not exist in the data. The indicator doesn't exist in the database. It's just something I'm typing in. Avoid them if possible.
Correct. So this next question I actually think is a really good question, and I think that they probably answered it in their first line. But Adam, I don't know if there's something that you're aware of, but it sounds like something that would be a really great idea, especially to make things more efficient and take the manual side out of having to really understand or know when the best time to schedule is. I mean, being able to have a job finish and then the next one start automatically sounds like a great idea. And I don't know if there's something that can be done with that, or if it definitely is an idea.
Stephen, the check is in the mail. We're going to talk about this in 2 weeks in our next office hours. But if I want to daisy chain my jobs together, what we're going to talk about in 2 weeks is integrating PA into your workflow. And so I actually haven't done this use case, but I have now 2 weeks to figure it out, half an hour less than 2 weeks to figure it out. So we're going to see if we can tackle this in 2 weeks on how we would do it. Yeah, today you can't. I will say it generally doesn't matter, not in all cases, but it generally doesn't matter, because if I have several indicators I want to run, I'm actually going to run one big job generally. There are some exceptions when we get into if our job's taking hours. I might break it up. But the key and Thomas talked about this, is you can put them in different jobs and stagger by at least a minute so that load balance takes over. So all of our nodes, all of our production instances, or most of ours, are going to be multi-node instances. And the PA job the pinch for a PA job is memory on the node. If I fire all of my jobs in 1 minute at the exact same time, the load balancer goes, oh, this node's not busy. And it might, if I have 5 jobs that fire, all 5 jobs will go to the same node, which is going to cause me problems. Potentially, it's going to cause me problems. So by staggering by a minute, one starts, I can start the next one. It's actually going to go to a different node. The query to the database is pretty light, and then the other node is taking the memory load and the processing load. So by staggering by at least a minute between my jobs, I can overlap. You don't want to overlap by more than the number of nodes you have, which you may not know how many nodes you have. So don't do 100 at a time. But if you're doing 2 or 3 or 4 at a time, it's generally going to be okay. And if you're doing more, you generally have a bigger instance, so it's generally going to be okay. But the use case is still perfectly valid. So we will talk about we will walk through how we would chain jobs together if that's what we needed to do. Although I think in most use cases you wouldn't need to do that. You can just stagger them or put them in one big job. And I don't think we talked about this specifically, but when we are putting jobs together, the jobs run as indicator sources. So the more indicator sources, the more indicators per source you get in a job, the more memory it takes, but the more efficient you are, because we only have to pull the data once. The indicator, all the indicators in an indicator source use the same data. So I only have to pull that data once to do an indicator source. If I put indicators from the same indicator source in different jobs, I'm actually doing more work because I have to pull the data twice from the database, once for each job. And the memory usage is cleared when I switch the indicator source in the job. And this is getting quite detailed, but I think we're in the right session for it. So if I put unrelated indicators on different indicator sources in the same job, they run serially. It's just like I chain them together. There's no downside to doing that. So even if, as long as they're different indicator sources, if I have 2 jobs daisy chained together, or I have 1 job with 2 indicator sources, that's the equivalent. Processing wise, time wise, everything, it's the equivalent. So there may be a different use case for it, but generally speaking, I just put them in 1 job and let it go. Okay, hopefully that answered that one. Did I just answer the next one too? So a question is it true that it's more efficient to group indicators together that use the same indicator source in a job? Yes. So, and again, to hit that specifically is that the indicator source is the data set you're getting. So if that has 50,000 records in it, I pull that 50,000 records and then I'm counting one field, summing another field, but the heavy lift is pulling that data into the app node to process it. So it is absolutely more efficient to process more indicators from the same indicator source in the same job. The one caveat with that is it will end up taking slightly more memory. So there are cases, because of memory consumption and the number of scores we're collecting and breakdowns and elements, where we'll be required to break them into separate jobs just because we can't do it all at one time. But that should be the exception. Generally, you're going to put all of your indicators for the same indicator source in 1 job and collect them together. It'll be more efficient. And specifically, if you have scripts, the scripts only evaluate once for the indicator source. So that can be a lot of my time. So by breaking them apart, I will effectively double my time. And adding more in there adding an additional indicator from the same source should add a negligible amount of time. Like, I don't think you'd be able to consistently see it. If it took a minute, maybe it'd take 1:05 when you have the second one, but maybe it would take 55 seconds. So absolutely run your indicators for the indicator source together until you have an issue. All right, Thomas, here's one for you to follow up on. What's the best practice for historical jobs? Should we keep the historical job around per indicator or per indicator source, or just have one big historical job with everything in it?
Well, I don't know that I would make one big historical job with everything in it. Again, I think it comes down to how you manage it, right? And the maintenance of it. I don't know that you need a historical job for each indicator. I don't think that that's necessary. I know that in the text that we went through, it talked about making sure that you use a new historical job for a new indicator or something or indicators that were maybe for something that was out of the box or whatnot. So I would just say that you know, when you need to run something historical, I don't think that there's anything wrong with using an existing historical job if you pull out what's not needed that's in there. But the other thing that you have to think about is how that historical job is set up from a time perspective, right? How much time are you trying to pull? Maybe you have an historical job that looks at I want to see a year's worth of data, or a quarter's worth of data, or 6 months worth of data, or whatnot. So having maybe something like that, and I'm obviously going to pass this back to Adam because he may have a best practice that he's done. I just know that from what I've done in the past is, you know, keeping a few historical jobs out there that I just know which one to put the indicator into whenever I need to pull a certain amount's worth of data. So I know that in the one present or little display or video that we did, there was an indicator that was in 2 daily and 1 historical. So even though it's sitting in that historical, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's been ran since that very first time that it was actually put in that historical, but maybe the person just left it in there. So if I would look at when was the last time that particular historical job was actually ran. And if you can get, you know, away with using that one and just moving the indicators out of it that you don't need, maybe you can do that. But if you also feel comfortable that you don't want to mess with any of the historical jobs that are out there, because maybe whoever put them, whatever the other person was that put in that historical job, they want to make sure that when they go back to that indicator that it's there, then maybe you need to create a new historic job. I don't know if there's anything, a strict set of rules that are around that, unless, Adam, you're aware of something. I think it just comes down to how you manage it. I think the bigger thing to take away from historical jobs is only run them when you need that historical data. Don't depend on historical jobs to update information that you can get from a daily job. I think that's the way that I would answer. And Adam, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that anymore.
I think it's pretty good. I end up creating one historical job per daily job, if historical is possible. So I'm generally 1-to-1, but sometimes there is no historical job. But if I have like my incident daily metrics, I'll have an incident historical metrics that goes along with it. Make sure in your historical jobs you exclude the breakdowns that are not historically safe to collect, like state. We just can't collect state historically, so just exclude it so it's empty. And then historical jobs, probably should write this up a little bit more. There are some nuances in it. It's covered in, I believe, in the advanced training, how you tune it so what you can collect and what you can't collect. And remember, if you have them all in one job and you want to collect your historical data, you're going to overwrite whatever you have. So for instance, if you're adding a breakdown, you can collect that historically, but you might have to create a new historic job where you're tuning the indicators, or you're saying, don't collect the main number, don't collect any of these breakdowns, but collect this one breakdown. But then I'll generally delete it when I'm done. I'll keep it, make sure everything went through. And then I will have one historical job, which is optimized. It's not just a blank throw it in, but it's optimized that if I had to collect this historically, I could. And it's rare that I have to run a historical job, but it does happen, right? So we found some problem was not, some integration was broken, and all of my numbers that I have for the last 15 days are invalid. I'll then have to run a historical collection, right? I'm not going to be able to get the breakdowns by state, but the numbers I do have will be right. But again, to the best practices, it's ostensibly going to be 1-to-1 where possible. We're 1-to-1, and then the historical job will be tuned and configured for what's historically safe to collect. And it's good when you're building it to think about it. So that way, when you're in an emergency, you have a plan, right? You know, I can run this, and you don't have to spend 2 or 3 days creating a job, configuring it, and causing problems. We do see people run into problems where they run a historical job that they didn't mean to and erase really good data. And that's quite difficult to recover PA scores that you've overwritten with bad historical data. Okay. We have a couple more in here. So one came up, which is a follow-up I'll get. Here's one for, well, I'll follow up on this one. Is there best practice in the number of indicators in a single indicator source? As many as make sense. If I can reuse the indicator source, I want to reuse the indicator source. Again, I get the economies of scale that I only have to pull that data back. The guideline is the balancing side of this is that I want my indicator sources as small as possible. So I don't want to have all of my new indicators, an indicator source that contains all open incidents, all incidents open today and all incidents closed today, right? Because that set doesn't really overlap. So I want to have my indicator source, which gives me my superset, but as small as possible. And I want to make sure my indicators are using it. So there's some subjectivity here, but I want to see an indicator on every indicator source that has no conditions, because that tells me I'm not pulling back extra data. And I want to, again, get that indicator source where I can get multiple. If I'm always one-to-one, I think I can probably group them together. It's not inherently bad, but generally I'm going to have multiple indicators on an indicator source. There is not it's very data specific. So there's not an optimum, but just make sure that if you can reuse an indicator source, if I can make the indicator source 5% bigger and group together 3 indicators, that's better. Fewer indicator sources is generally better performance. As a follow up to that, count distinct is usually takes longer to collect. Yes, I'm a big fat liar. They all do better. Count distinct has to keep has to keep things in memory. This shouldn't make more sense until you're running low on memory. So count distinct on very large volumes of distinct values can have an impact in memory. And once you get to a certain memory limit, the job slows down and we start paging. So the count distinct on with a large number of distinct values is one where I actually might pull just that count distinct indicator into a separate job. Same indicator source still, but a separate job, because then I have a different memory pool. It will move back. I can load balance it to a different node. So count distincts, that's generally where I am going to separate them out. So I stand by we should group everything together, but the count distinct is where I might start pulling stuff out. Again, once I see that it's slow, that's where I'm going to look at it. Okay. This is one that comes up as well. So it comes up regularly. An indicator source is monthly. Should I collect it on the first day of the month? The analogy to this is just what Thomas talked about with a daily indicator. Daily indicators don't have to run at midnight. They don't have to run at 12:01. They can run at 3 a.m. and it's fine. A monthly indicator, I generally do run on the first day of the month, but I don't run it at 12:01. I don't run it at 1 a.m. I'll probably run it. I actually might run it during the daytime, or really the sweet spot for a monthly indicator, if you can handle the monthly indicator like this, is to run it after hours on the first. So 7 p.m., 8 p.m. on the first. And now I don't have it ready on the first of the morning. So sometimes I do need to run it in the early AM, but I'm going to run it just like we do midnight to midnight for a daily. I'm running it from the 1st to the 31st. That number doesn't change whether I run it at 1 a.m. or 7 p.m. So if I am able to get away with it, I'm going to run it at after hours on the first. If not, then I'll run it on the first. But if I can put it to after hours on the second, that's fine too. There are some indicators that I think of this as like closing my financial books. Just because my quarter ends, I don't close my books for another 10 days, right? I have to let some things settle. And if that's the case, then you actually might want to run it on the third, right? Let the assignment groups get settled in case anything moves. Let the priorities get settled. Things get resolved. The SLAs finally find the breach or not. So there are some metrics which aren't final in that month. They do need a few more days to correct the data. Again, just like closing our financial books. And in that case, you'd push it out. Okay. So Thomas, here's one for you. If we need to collect historical for a new breakdown on a matrix, so I'm just adding a new breakdown I'm adding a new breakdown to an indicator. Second level, first level, I don't think it matters here. Do I need to recollect the indicator?
Well, I mean, if you're looking for anything that's in the past, then obviously you have to. But then not only that, it needs to be able to. the indicator itself needs to know the new breakdown. So it's got to look for the data that includes that. So you would have to I mean, that indicator, that's the only way that you're going to get the new data for that breakdown, because the breakdown is in the indicator itself. Unless I'm understanding that incorrectly.
Well, when you collect it, I believe this, and I am doing this from memory. I believe what you're going to want to do though on that job is to set the indicator to inactive in the job. So just like you exclude breakdowns,
yeah,
when you do the historical collection, you can set in the job, in the new historical job, you're going to set the indicator to active as false or inactive. I think it's active as false, and collect it. And that should collect just the breakdown, that new breakdown. It'll exclude the other ones because you'll explicitly exclude the other ones. And the indicator, active or inactive, is whether or not I'm grabbing the global number. Whether or not you need it, that's a decision for you. But if you don't, and I'm just purely adding the new breakdown, which may not add up to the total, so you got to be aware of that, right? But if that's the case, I believe you'll just set the indicator. You add it, but you set it to inactive or active as false. It's a bit tricky, but if you're doing that, make sure you test it. But I believe that's the setting you're going to want. Indicator is added, it's false. All of the other breakdowns are excluded, and the one new breakdown will not be excluded. All right. We have a couple of other ones that came in, and I'm just reading them to it. So make sure I get them correct. So a question came in the community, and I believe I believe it's on the idea portal now, that has to do with conditional PA on a data collector setting the condition. And the condition, I will say, it's inherited from jobs. All jobs that support conditions. And if you evaluate the false, then the job doesn't run. And I had a question about this, about why, right? Like I run everything daily. I run everything. I run everything daily or monthly, depending on what it needs to be. And it runs and it runs. I don't have a false condition. And this is a very interesting use case, that there's a condition to check to make sure that to check the data, I believe, to check the data so that it doesn't blow up, so my job doesn't fail. I am actually more in favor of the job failing, and I'm going to follow up about this, but I actually like to see the failures and handle them. And the same thing happens, somewhat related to what we're talking about next week, or sorry, in 2 weeks, about how to handle failures. I would look at how do we handle the failure, but making sure we do fail, because a fail is a fail. If I don't collect, I'm consider that to be a fail. But maybe we want it to be a little bit of a softer failure. So I appreciate that comment, and we will follow up offline to get how we can better handle that, whether we improve the product or if there's a better design for this. And I think the last question we have in the queue, if you have anything else, please feel free to submit it. We do have just a couple minutes left. But this next question is for interactive filters and date filters, and the differences between performance analytics and reporting. And there's a few of these. So I mentioned time zones. So time zones for PA are fixed, but if I look at that indicator source, so Thomas is in the Eastern time zone, I'm in the Pacific time zone. So when I look at PA and run reports, I get the same result. But if he looks at it, he might get a different result because he's 3 hours ahead of me. That's a difference in reporting. And then the filters can do the same thing. There's some inconsistencies. The question is, are there inconsistencies? Yes, there are inconsistencies. It is being worked on to unify them. There's some exciting development that you'll hear about, that you might hear about in the next few months, where we are trying to reconcile it. We've actually absolutely heard everybody's comments about the differences between PA and reporting are painful. Interactive filters and dashboards, dashboard breakdowns. So we are doing everything we can to reconcile those. so that it is harder to tell the difference between reporting and PA. That's our goal, and that PA effectively is just reporting with history. We're not there yet, but we're working towards it. It's one of the issues when we come into with best practices that when you put PA and reports on the same dashboard, it can get weird. So generally on a specific tab, I'll try to stick to PA or stick to reporting. But we are working on it. And if we go through these, if you have some case, and I see we have some cases here, but if you put them in the some screenshots in the community about what we're trying to get to, we might be able to come up with what the best setting is. And whether that means modifying the out of the box date range filters, which can be quite challenging, or modifying the time series that are available in PA. That's actually a little bit easier. There are some solutions to line these up. And I want to make sure that we know about where they're off so that we can correct them. But again, our goal is that we resolve these and tune it so that they all behave the same, regardless of where the source of the data is. Okay, and I believe we got that last question answered. Oh, I'm going to add one. A question came in about, this is a plug for me, so I'm going to go for it. A question came up about where do I find reports that are used on which dashboard? And so we have report statistics that talk about what's being used. I posted a blog a couple of weeks ago, I think, about creating a database view that
Adam. Sorry about
database view that shows you where all the reports that are on a dashboard. Also, if you go to the dashboard and use the impact and dependency analysis, so if you go to the dashboard properties, you can say, show me what's on here. It will show you everything that's on that dashboard, one dashboard at a time. But specifically, if you're looking at reports, the way I do it is use the view that I posted. You can create the view and it'll allow you to see all the reports on a dashboard and all the dashboards that a report is on, along with those statistics and combining it all together. That's probably the easiest way to do it if you build out that view. If I'm looking for performance analytics or I'm looking for interactive filters, then I'll use the dependency analysis. Okay, we will come back. I'm going to try and steal screen sharing. Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. Very, very helpful about the best practices. To wrap up, again, this session will get posted to the community later today. Hopefully, I will remember to add it to the playlist in YouTube as well. Thank you for reminding me about that earlier. That'll be in there. We'll post the deck. We'll post the links that we have. What we answered in the questions, we'll post those links as well. So you can come back to that community article and get everything you saw today. What we're going to talk about in 2 weeks. So we talked about this briefly, but we're going to talk about introduction into leveraging performance analytics in workflows. So how do I get my score into a workflow? How do I make my workflow smarter? And then also about how do I integrate PA into my workflow in terms of listening to events and doing things when things happen, whether it is a job failing, we talked about, or a job completing and I want to fire the next job, or if a threshold is met and I don't want to just get the indicator or an email, but I want to take some other action when the threshold's met. So we're going to talk about this for half an hour in 2 weeks. It's an intro into it. So we want to talk about what we can do and get your thoughts on that, on how this works. But workflows are essential to ServiceNow. Analytics are important to all of us. How do we merge those together to get a much better result for our organization? So that's what we're going to talk about in 2 weeks. This one is one that gets brought up occasionally on how we want to do it and asked for specifically today. What else can we do for you? Lots of different perspectives out there. So please find this community article, post your comments in there and what you'd like us to cover in the future. We're planning out the rest of the year in the next week or so. So having your comments will be very helpful for us to cover those topics that you want to see. And until next time, if you have a question, post in the community. Again, I recommend checking out that article about how to write a great question so you can get a very quick and accurate answer. Screenshots are incredibly valuable, but there's a lot more to it. Catch up on previous office hours. So I think in this one we referenced three or four previous office hours. Those are all on that on that page where you register for this event. You can get the recaps, you get those decks, and you'll see the list of what we're planning for in the future. Submit your ideas. We talked about one of the ideas that came up today. How can we make performance analytics and reporting better for you? Tell us through the idea portal. And if you have a few minutes, look through what else is there and vote those ideas up. We are actively planning new releases. So seeing those, hearing your comments, asking for what you'd like it to do will help us get that into the product so that it does those things for you, right? This is the best way to record your vote and tell us what's important to you, even if it was somebody else's idea. And always take some training. The knowledge labs are going to get pulled in 2 weeks, or sorry, at the end of the year, the end of the year. But take the opportunity to do that. Again, virtual agent fundamentals, predictive intelligence fundamentals, all those knowledge labs, lots of great learning out there for you, self-paced, hands-on. It's great training. It's free. Take some, send it to your colleagues. If they're trying to learn about performance analytics, don't take 3 hours and explain it to them. Send them a lab and let them explore and learn. Okay. Thank you for all your questions. Thanks for listening, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Adam.